There's a hidden thread that runs beneath every system we trust: medicine, law, science, innovation. And most of the time, we don't see it until something breaks, until a diagnosis lands, until the data doesn't seem to match the story. Today's conversation follows that thread. Dr. Chadi Nabhan has spent his career moving between worlds that rarely speak to each other, mainly the clinic and the courtroom, the patient's bedside and the machinery of clinical trials, the cold precision of data, and the irreducible weight of human suffering. From uncovering scientific truth in the landmark Monsanto trials, to translating cancer into language patients can actually hear, to using AI to accelerate life-saving therapies, his work asks the quiet but radical question: what happens when we refuse to separate evidence from empathy? This episode isn't just about oncology or artificial intelligence. It's about learning to see clearly inside systems which can sometimes obscure, and inside moments when being human, well, it makes clarity hardest of all. Dr. Chadi Nabhan, a physician, scientist, oncologist, and healthcare innovator whose career bridges frontline cancer care, precision medicine, and AI-driven clinical research. Currently serving as the Chief Medical Officer and Head of Strategy at Wright. He focuses on using artificial intelligence to improve clinical trial design, site selection, and patient matching, bridging greater precision and equity to how new therapies are developed. Previously, Dr. Nabhan's held senior leadership roles at the Caris Life Sciences Center, where he helped advance genomic-driven oncology at scale. He's the author of Toxic Exposure, which chronicles his role as a key expert witness in the Monsanto Roundup trials. And The Cancer Journey is a widely accessible guide written to demystify cancer for patients, families, and clinicians alike. So those two books are available. Two more coming in 2026, with hundreds of academic publications and a parallel career as a host of Healthcare Unfiltered. Dr. Nabhan is deeply committed to translating complex science into truth-telling conversations that honor both data and our humanity. And I'm so pleased to have you, Dr. Chadi Nabhan, on the show today on the DNA of Things. Welcome.
Jeremy, thank you. This is a very kind introduction. I don't think I deserve all of this long introduction. I appreciate your invite. Looking forward to our conversation.
Well, I love that you get to be on the other side of the mic, because I think your podcast has been going for 6 years. Is that correct?
6 years.
Yeah. So I should also preface our conversation by saying that we were introed by Simon Arkell, who you're working with at Wright. Just quickly, how did you guys come into contact?
So he's my boss. He's probably going to listen to this, and he now has like a big look on his face because he likes to boss me around. I met Simon almost 10 years ago, actually, when he had co-founded his just immediately last company before Wright. It's called Deep Lens. And Simon is, as you know, he's an entrepreneur. He's an Olympian. And he really is deeply committed to changing lives of patients with cancer. He has personally had family members affected with this disease, and he has true passion about this. So Deep Lens was a company that was really ingesting data of patients affected by cancer. So molecular data, genomics, clinical data, radiology, pathology, all the information pertains to a particular patient that is coming to a healthcare system, and then matches these patients to available clinical trials that exist. So it allows patients that normally wouldn't have had access to clinical trials to have access to these. And as you know, these clinical trials sometimes could have the best therapies available that could save patients' lives. So I met him through a mutual friend who was his co-founder at Deep Lens, and I became a consultant and an advisor for him at Deep Lens. And I think, as you know, Simon did very well and a very successful exit with Deep Lens. And he had a retirement of about 5 days, I think. And he co-founded Wright, which is the current company. It's about almost 3 years old now. And we have always stayed in touch and in communication. And he needed to have a chief medical officer that really allows the ability to provide medical strategy and have an expertise in clinical trials and domain that we are focused on. So I joined him in April 2024. So it's almost 2 years now since I joined him as the chief medical officer and head of strategy.
Amazing. And you guys just went through a big raise. I saw, I think, somewhere in a press release.
Yeah, we had a seed round that was successful. We are a venture-backed company. I think Simon has a very well-established name in the VC world by virtue of the companies he has founded or co-founded in the past, and that they were very successful. So it's not that challenging if you have the right idea and the right team. I think people will gravitate into supporting you. So we've been very fortunate and very blessed, and it's only just the beginning.
Yeah, I was blessed to actually meet with him and Caprice just actually in Irvine, California, a couple of weeks ago. So it was great. Yeah, it was great to be reconnected. And shout out Simon if you're listening. I mean, he's been instrumental, played a pivotal role in my own journey as a founder. I was actually connected to him through Dan Paff, who's I think a 13-time Olympic coach, who's also one of my guests. Simon was also one of my guests. And for those who don't know, Simon, he's a left-handed pole vaulter out of Australia. So not only does a toilet water run in reverse in Australia, and maybe they pole vault in reverse in Australia, I don't know. But he's a man who can see the world differently and better and make it that way. And he's just unrelenting in his pursuit, and he's just been such a great role model. So a huge thank you to Simon for connecting us. But
Jeremy, I feel like you're downgrading your guests. You're just bringing all of these Olympians and there's me. I mean, what's going on? It's just nothing. I'm intimidated.
Well, you know what? I think this is a good warm up for what we're about to talk about, because I was just, blown away by our initial conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I started to do, some deep research on, your own journey, and even just kind of our initial conversation today, speaking to your writing history and how it was born out of the work you did as a key witness with Monsanto. And, given where you sit now at the kind of nexus between, understanding, human biology and risk of cancer, and then, facilitating the cures and your storytelling, making this information accessible at scale. I'd really love to, learn how, I'm fascinated to learn about the Monsanto story. I think a lot of listeners would be too. So I think what I've done is I've set up the main act here, hopefully in this initial conversation, because you're at right now, but you've had a career full of, twists and turns, even your immigration into the US. So I'd love to, hear a little bit about your kind of origin story, and, how you got to be that key witness at Monsanto, and then how the book came out of that. If you're good, I'd love to start with that.
Yeah, I've never done expert witness work in the past. It was not something, frankly, that I was interested in doing. As I was practicing and taking care of patients, mainly patients with lymphoma and leukemia, it is not uncommon to be approached by malpractice lawyers, mainly asking you to opine on cases where either you want to provide expertise on behalf of the defendant or behalf of the plaintiff. But it was really something that I never was interested in. And I even wrote that in the book, that this was, a common occurrence, but I've always said no. Something was different in this situation, because I wasn't really asked to take a look at a malpractice lawsuit against physicians. It was really a law firm from Virginia that reached out to me asking me about the relationship between Roundup, which is a weed killer. It is the most used herbicide weed killer in the world, and lymphoma. And my initial reaction was, no, I'm not really aware of the in-depth relationship or correlation between Roundup and lymphoma. However, I'm aware that pesticides increase the risk of lymphoma. It is always something I've learned in the past. But as I was speaking with the lawyers, I was really looking things online, and I noticed there's so much online on Roundup and lymphoma. So I agreed to take a look at it and just to review it and research it and so on. And the more I researched it, the more I became convinced that for some patients, um, Roundup does cause lymphoma. And I agreed to testify on behalf of the patients. So there were the first trial that took place against Monsanto and Roundup started in July 2018 and was Johnson versus Monsanto, and I was the oncology expert witness testifying on behalf of Mr. Johnson and the plaintiffs against Monsanto. And that trial was won by the plaintiffs, by the patient. And the second trial was Hardeman versus Monsanto, and that trial was also won by Hardeman. And then the third trial was Piliades versus Monsanto. It's an elderly couple, both diagnosed with lymphoma. They were married and they both sued Monsanto, and they also won against Monsanto. So as I was going through the journey of experiencing what happens in the courtroom, in depositions, how lawyers talk to you, and I just started journaling. I just started writing notes so I won't forget, for example, what happened to me. Like on this day, I went to the court. On this day, I had the deposition. On this day, I had the court appearance and things of that nature. I just wanted to remember certain things that were happening. And then after the Piliad trial was concluded in the summer of 2019, I thought to myself, maybe I should just write a book, because I wonder if other people would be curious what happened behind closed doors in certain areas that, in the courtroom. The court is obviously open to the public. You can go on and sit down and listen to the entire proceedings. It was not a closed trial, but a lot of people won't do that. So I wanted really to bring others into the courtroom. I wanted them to I wanted to create the scene where they can actually, as if they are sitting in the courtroom, watching and seeing and witnessing exactly what happened. So I started journaling and writing, and then when COVID hit, and people were not doing a whole lot, I started writing more, and so in 2020 I was writing and writing and writing, and the book launched in February 2023. My goal of the book was very simple. I believe that a lot of people need to know about Roundup and about Monsanto and what happened in these trials. Monsanto has always argued that Roundup is safe, you can drink it, all of these things. That's actually not factually correct. And I go through the evidence that I reviewed. I also talk about the fact that there's no perfect science. There's nothing perfect. So sometimes, as a physician, as a scientist, as a clinician, you have to help patients and reach a conclusion despite the imperfection of science. And so that was the birth of that book, and it has captured a lot of attention. I believe a lot of people have read it. I've gotten very good feedback on it, and so I always say it's like as if you're watching a Netflix documentary of what really happened in the courtroom and the drama behind the scenes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that, Geronimo? Because to the extent that you can share, because as I was thinking about this conversation, there's I don't know, a bias to use words like a sentence like you're out on a fact finding mission and you're looking to find the signal of truth amidst all this kind of noise of, and then I've got this phrase of corporate obfuscation, or like, is there deliberate wrongdoing, um and, or step back a little further and just kind of give you the context of the question, because it hits to what you're speaking on in science, as a learning methodology, right? Because a lot of the times that a general general population or the layperson that frankly is specialized on delivering some other form of value, let's say to society, doesn't have the luxury of time to think deeply about scientific methodology, as an example. And, to your important point is the science is always moving as the body of knowledge becomes more, enriched. And so you look at an organization like, say, Monsanto, and you've got, essentially an organization. I haven't read their mission statement, to be fair, but it's probably something like, honoring global food supply, right? And making food accessible. And so, well, part of that process requires that the crops survive, right? And so we need pesticides. And so I don't think that anybody would necessarily go out and deliberately do this. But you've got the fallout. And so you've got this corporation, I suppose, that it becomes its own entity and needs to protect itself. So if you're just thinking about it just purely as a system of survival, I think the question that I'm moving to is something like, are the constraints on the system appropriate? What are they, I guess, first of all? And then is it inevitable that this kind of thing would happen, or could it be corrected? Like could the system architecture be corrected to minimize this? And then what's the learning from the verdicts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I mean, I did, all of these are very good questions. And I went actually through this because in the book, I describe some of the things that you have to go through, right, to apply for a register. You have to get approval to use a pesticide, right? When you bring it to you have to go through. But then at the same time, I share with the readers the type of studies that were submitted, and technology studies that were done by a lab that was subsequently found to be fraudulent, and they made up data, for example. I mean, there's all of these things are important, but then you have to step back and say, well, what type of data was actually presented to the EPA, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency, that was really that led to them saying this is safe. And yes, the EPA maintains that this is safe, but there's a lot of nuances to that. And I think that's really where you have to, as they say, look behind the curtain and try to really understand what actually happened. But that was not my role. So obviously there are investigative journalists, there are investigative lawyers, all of these things. My role was more to focus on the science, which is there evidence that glyphosate, which is the main ingredient of Roundup, causes cancer? That's one. And number two, is there evidence that in this specific patient, the use of Roundup caused this patient's cancer? So there are two issues. First, do we have data out there to support that this pesticide, this herbicide, and its main ingredient, glyphosate, are carcinogenic? That's one. And then, in that specific patient that is suing Monsanto, is there evidence that this particular carcinogen causes the cancer in this specific patient? So that was the role that was assigned to me. But in the book, Jeremy, I go beyond that. I share with the readers everything, because I think in the book, it was important for me to share with the readers the type of evidence I relied on, and whether it's good or bad or incomplete. But then how did I reach my conclusion? So I almost wanted to bring the reader into my brain and the things I went through to reach the particular conclusion. But within that, I also share with the readers information about the EPA, about the type of studies, the ghostwriting, right? The ghostwriting. I mean, recently, just a few weeks ago, a major paper that was published by Williams et al. It was published in 2000, like over 20 years ago. But Monsanto has relied on this paper, saying that this paper shows that glyphosate is safe and it's no problem, it causes no issues whatsoever. Finally, this paper has been retracted after 20 years because of ghostwriting, because the people who wrote that paper were actually not necessarily the authors. It was really written ghostwriting by Monsanto, and it just got retracted. And I can send you the link on that. And you will have it. So sometimes it takes time for evidence to go together, but I'm sure very clear for your listeners, my role was not of this, not the investigation. The book, the book that I wrote gives you a more complete picture, but my role in the trials was mainly purely focused on the science. The lawyers had to prove other things, of course, but my role was really focused on the science specifically. But in the book, you're going to learn about ghostwriting. You're going to learn about the lab that was in Northbrook, Illinois, that was fraudulent and was made up data of toxicology. You're going to learn about the EPA. You're going to learn about some of the what looked like back dealings between the EPA and corporations and things of that nature. I think it's really important for your listeners who are very interested in this topic. I really recommend that they check it out. I think they're gonna learn so many things that they probably do not know or they wouldn't have known otherwise.
Mhm. Well, that seems to be a passion of yours, right? Is taking this rich and the complex topics and making it accessible for more people. So like the other instances, like the cancer journey, maybe you can speak a little bit about that, like essentially how that helps the layperson who is diagnosed navigate.
I think
How did that book come into being?
I think it helps everyone in my view, right? I mean, sometimes I don't know what when we say the layperson, I don't know what we mean by that because when you are affected by cancer as a patient or as a caregiver, you suddenly become a layperson. You're no longer, I mean, it doesn't matter. This is not something that you do every day, no matter how much you have knowledge and understanding. But when you walk into this exam room, you really want just to be explained to in a very easy way that you can understand. You're not walking in to listen to a lecture on cancer or to listen to a PowerPoint, no matter what. So I really wanted to write something that explains cancer as a disease and through the journey that a patient goes when they are affected by cancer. Because I was thinking, how do I explain cancer? Because cancer obviously is not one disease, but there are so many elements to cancer. Am I going to talk about staging the cancer? Am I going to talk about clinical trials? Do I talk about diagnosis? Do I talk about chemotherapy, radiation? What do I talk about? There's so much. So my approach was, well, what is the journey that a patient goes through when they are diagnosed by cancer? The first part is screening. Sometimes you screen, sometimes you don't have a screening test, but there's a screening. Then there's the symptoms, right? Signs and symptoms. Then there's a diagnosis. Then there's all of these things. So I basically put myself in the patient's shoes, going through the journey, and every single chapter goes through one step in that journey and explaining that step in a very, very easy way, using uh, using really simple language, using common language, and using stories. I'm a big storyteller. I like telling stories because I think they resonate with people. I think people don't like to be lectured to, or talked at. They want to be told stories, and if they can really reach a conclusion through a story you're telling them, that's going to resonate with them more. So I tell stories through the book. All of the stories are stories of people I cared for, of families I cared for. And through the stories, I explain everything about cancer from screening, diagnosis, signs, symptoms. When I talk about chemotherapy, I bring stories. When I talk about radiation therapy, I bring stories and things of that nature. And there are two other chapters, several chapters that are really important that I have not seen in other books. One is about communication. I think communication is key, the way we talk to people, to families, and to patients. And I think it's chapter 20, and it is a very, it's, I mean, everything I wrote in the book is from my heart, but this particular chapter, I came out explaining probably how naive I was early on in my career, because it's very easy to assume that you are the best communicator and the person who are you communicating with is not understanding you. So early in my career, when I would spend time explaining to a patient and family something, and if they don't understand it, I would assume, well, I've done everything I can. It's really on them now to understand it. And that was wrong. If they don't understand it, it means I did not communicate it effectively. So I should really communicate it better. So I have another entire chapter on communication. I have an entire chapter on caring for the caregiver. People do not appreciate sometimes the importance of caregivers, but caregivers go through a lot of emotional turmoil because they are dealing with their loved one who has cancer. And sometimes they are left almost the unsung heroes. People don't really realize what they go through emotionally and everything else. So there are other parts of the book that addresses certain elements that are not scientific, but they're very humanistic in nature.
And I want to pull on that thread of what you captured, and that was the term I used, layperson. Um, because I mean, it seems what we're circling around now is communication, and how language. I mean, language is the technology, isn't it? I mean, we're really seeing that now with artificial intelligence. We're leveraging large language models. So how good are those inputs, and how what's the efficacy of the models that are analyzing those language sets, let's say. And this is, this hits home for me because my wife played a major role as a caregiver in her father's blood cancer journey. And yeah, it was really hard, and it challenged her emotionally. Obviously she felt that she did everything that she could do, and so there was peace in his passing. But and there's a certain resilience that she has now because of that journey. But I think that there's 2 points I wanted to make. Is one on the top, the use of the language and the communication. Um, so like, who is the layperson? And then number two is like, ultimately, how does this help us come into relationship with? And so this is a kind of a new orientation my wife and I are even taking in the home. That's what we ask ourselves is like this New Year's. It's not about setting goals. It's about how do we want to be in relationship with each other? How do we want to be in relationship with the highest ordeal? How do we want to be in a relationship with our daughter? With how do I want to be in a relationship with customers? Like, how are we serving them, right? And then who do we need to become to achieve that relationship? And what I'm hearing from you is like, well, how do I become? How do I maximize, which isn't the right word, the relationship between me and patients? And it seems to me like this book is certainly a tool to do that. And coming back on this notion of the layperson is like, it's almost like when I'm acting as a scientist, right, trained as a molecular biologist, I imagine myself outside of the system, looking from the outside objectively, or so we're taught. And it's a lot easier for me if I'm looking at, say, a metagenomic system of a hypermobile gene pool within bacteria. Okay, I don't have much personal relationship with those molecules per se. Well, perhaps that's not true. Maybe when my mom became septic, well, that's something else that does become emotionally charged. Right? And, I have a background in genetics, and so I can look at a genome and I can discern, risks and way to optimize. But then as soon as I'm looking at my daughter's genome, I'm emotionally compromised. I'm a subject within it. And so like I become a layperson, for example. You know what I mean? It's like I can't discern, objectively. And just even today, like I had the technician came out to help me work on the generator. Well, I understand generally an electric system, but I'm a layperson. I don't know why it's broken. And I don't.
We are lay people in areas that we don't have expertise in.
Right. Right. Well, but then when you become into like a specific situation or an anecdote, even though it's within your area of expertise, what I've experienced is you become emotionally compromised. And so you feel like a layperson, you feel lost, you feel like, how do I, discern the new environment that I found myself in? And it's literally a life or death situation here, i.e. the cancer diagnosis. So this is fascinating to me because there's kind of this natural arc that's come here. There's the Monsanto um, challenge, then there's the cancer journey, and then now here you are in the middle with Right, and what you're doing there. It seems to me is okay. Well, here's a potential cause. Here's the effect. How do we minimize or eradicate the outcomes of these diseases? And so I'd love to hear about how that adventure is going for you now. And I know there are the other two books that you're working on that I definitely want to cover as well, but I want to cover how the Right is really exciting based on conversation I've had with Simon recently. Love to hear where
I'm
that is also.
really excited about this. I think this is hopefully, and I'm sure that Simon would agree to that. That we would love to imagine this to be our legacy in what
Mm,
we're able to do. Um, Personally, for 20 years, I've taken care of patients in clinic. I ran a lot of clinical trials. I was a principal investigator on many studies. I'm a firm believer that clinical trials help patients. And for some patients, clinical trials could save their lives because they could get access to therapies that are really transformational and could really make things powerful. However, it takes a lot of time for these clinical trials to complete. And there are many times I have given talks where I really start by explaining how time is key. Today, we are tipping this 2025, 2026. There are patients that if they were if that I've lost, personally lost, to particular cancers, that if they were diagnosed today, they would have not died from the cancer because there are new treatments for that cancer today that were not there 20 years ago when I lost these patients. So what does that tell you? It tells you that time is of the essence. We should really do better in bringing these new drugs to market faster because there are patient lives at stake here. And what we're trying to do at Right and what we are doing effectively is we are shortening the time that takes these clinical trials to complete. Most clinical trials, especially the larger ones, could take 10 to 15 years. They're costly in terms of the finances that they require. They're costly in terms of the time that they require. If we're able to shrink that time, even by a couple of years, 2 to 3 years, we could save lives because we are going to potentially, for some of these trials, we're going to help in bringing the drug that the trial is investigating faster to market. And one of the elements that takes a long time, one of the reasons why clinical trials take a long time is that these clinical trials usually open at sites that are not the best sites for this particular study. So, in order for you to enroll in this particular trial, as you know, you have to launch the trial, you have to open it in a variety of sites. Some trials could have 20, 30 sites, other trials could have 200, 300 sites. It depends on the scale of the study. However, what normally happens is most of these sites do not enroll for the patients that they assumed they will. Open the trial and they think they're going to enroll, but the reality, they don't. 80% of sites, Jeremy, uh, they actually run behind schedule. So if they tell you they're going to actually enroll 10 patients in that particular year, they're probably enrolling 3. And about 50% of sites, they enroll only 0 or 1 patient. And over 33%, over 1/3 of the large phase 3 trials close because of poor enrollment. So the sponsor, they say, well, what are we going to do? We have to close the site because it's costing a lot of money and they're not enrolling any patient. So we are really changing that vicious cycle. We are saying that we at Right, we will be able to actually give you as a sponsor or as a clinical research organization the best sites for this particular study, the sites that are going to enroll, the sites that have the patients you are looking for. The sites will win, the patients will win, the sponsors will win, and the CROs will win. This way, you open the trial at the most important and the most sites that are able to recruit for this particular study. How do we do that? We have digital twins for every single clinical trial site in the world. These digital twins really include the qualitative and the quantitative capabilities of these sites all over the world, whether it is the US, Europe, Latam, Asia, Middle East, Africa, wherever they are. And we have AI agents that have been able to uh, parse out a particular protocol and a particular study and match that specific study against these digital twins at scale. And then once we do that, we're able to automate a lot of the mundane work and the mundane labor intensive work that takes a lot of time. Our ultimate goal for the listeners to this show is that we are not developing drugs, we are not developing devices, but frankly, whatever drugs you have, whatever devices you have, unless the clinical trial enrolls and enrolls fast, that drug or that device is not going to reach the market and patients are not going to benefit. So we are going to put a dent into the cycle of clinical trials and we're going to shorten that and shrink that. And with this, we'll be able to help a lot of patients as well as sites and sponsors and CROs.
Okay, right. That's what's going to be my next question. So the ultimate, let's just say, customer that you're trying to serve is the innovator for the therapeutic, and the person who's been delegated to solve that problem is usually the CRO. Is that right? Is that
So it depends. So I think we serve our customer base. So there's more the direct customer and the indirect customer. And the direct customer will be the sponsor. These are the manufacturers. These are the pharmaceutical companies, the biotech companies, the device companies. These are the companies that have the innovators, like you said. These are the ones that make the drugs or make the devices or make the actual asset that they are trying to bring to market. And then the CROs, these are clinical research organizations. These are large entities that usually help the sponsors in executing on their clinical trials. So they manage the administrative tasks. They usually are in charge of site selection. They can help them in optimizing the protocol that they're writing and things like that. So we actually work with both because for sponsors, they don't always use CROs for every single asset they have or for every single clinical trial they have. They use CROs for some clinical trials and sometimes they execute on their clinical trials on their own. So we are able to help the CROs and the sponsors. These are our direct customers because these are the ones who are bringing these novel things to market. I would say, in addition to that, our indirect customers are the patients and the sites. At the end of the day, patients are the ones who are going to be enrolled on the clinical trials. And we believe that we are helping patients every day by bringing these trials to them, that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to receive them. So we help these patients, and the other indirect customer is the sites. These sites, these research sites, they want to have clinical trials, but they should have the clinical trials that match the patients that they serve. And frankly, also from a business perspective, from a financial perspective, as a site, if you have the right studies and you're enrolling on these studies, you would be able to be financially um, uh, positive because these trials, you get paid for successfully enrolling on clinical trials. So I realize that this is like, it may appear a lot of customers, but the direct ones are actually the sponsors and the CROs, and the indirect ones are the sites and the patients.
Interesting? And so, what goes into quantifying a digital twin of a site?
There's a lot of information out there in the public domain about every single site that has done a clinical trial. In order to do a clinical trial today, you have to have certain qualifications to execute on that study. And that information exists somewhere in the public domain. As an example, on clinicaltrials.gov, it's a repository website that every single clinical trial that is enrolling exists on that, as well as the sites that the trial is open at. So knowing, for example, that a site has a specific study and knowing what the requirements of this study are, I should be able to infer and know what are the capabilities of this particular site. So it's almost that, again, like anything, if you are able to do X, you must have Y. You cannot do X if you don't have Y. And it's very similar here, because all of these sites that we have done clinical trials in the past, and they are doing clinical trials today. We are using our proprietary AI technology to make sure we understand what the sites could do and what they could not do. We are able to understand the demographics of a particular site. If a site is located in this particular geography, through the US Census, for example, I should be able to tell what's the percent of underrepresented minorities in this particular location. So if you're opening a study and you are really looking for a particular percent of underrepresented minorities, we should be able to help the sponsor, the CRO, open the site, open the trial at these particular sites. We are able to tell the investigator's experience at these particular sites. These information are available on PubMed by virtue of the publications that these investigators did on in this particular location. We are able to tell who is the right investigator for the right particular study and things of that nature. We are able to tell the regulatory history through the FDA. Is this site passing the FDA audit? Do they get audited a lot? Do they have any warning letters? Things of that nature. All of this information, Jeremy, is publicly available. Our AI is bringing all of this data from all over and positioning them in these digital twins. So with our AI, we should be able then to tell what the site could do and what they cannot do.
Got it. So what you're basically doing on a global scale per the institutional locations is, well, the exclusion criteria are already defined, really, by the main customer. Like they know what kind of study participants they need, whether it's the cases versus controls. But then there's the the operational efficacy of the trial itself. There could be natural collaborators in the public sector, that is at the university, for example. There are natural collaborators, and I would suggest you're able to get some kind of a readiness score for each of the institution that is going to be unique to each study. And so that's why this becomes, infinitely valuable, because even if you're a single institution, like a pharmaceutical institution, and you've got multiple drugs, well, not all institutions, not all research centers are going to be created equal for all of your different products. So it's going to vary on a product by product basis, I think is what you're saying. Is that correct?
Yes. I think I love the readiness score. This is exactly it. I mean, for a particular study, site A may be the best. For another study, site A may not be, and it's actually site B, because there are certain elements of this particular trial that we need to match. So we're really matching a particular protocol, a particular study against the best sites for this study, because this is a huge pain point in clinical trials. Statistics do not lie. It's a huge pain point. And I could tell you, honestly, we spend a lot of time talking to sponsors, CROs, and so on. And we don't need to even explain the problem. I mean, people know. It's
Right.
explaining the solution. You know how it is. Sometimes you have to say, well, this is the problem. You don't even need to mention that anymore. Everybody knows the problem.
And now you can get to the solution set, the solution finding. Hey, just a quick nod to that word, ready state or readiness. At the beginning of our call, we were talking about like the lessons from Olympians.
Yep.
And that was one of the things that I learned in looking into the, the molecules of tens of thousands of athletes is, DNA is one of the things that would, dictate a fitness plan. And I'm using Dan Paff's definition of fitness here, which I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, um, ready for a specific task, right? So the fitness of a shot putter is very different than the fitness of a marathon runner. Yes. And the performance is even, defined differently, in the field. And so, yeah, there's a DNA component to that. There's an environmental component to that, just where they happen to be, what habits they've inherited by default. But then there is the kind of the activities or the habitual side of it. And that's kind of the engine of, kind of remaking and rebuilding based on a specific aim. And it's, it's high stakes, right? And that's why it made me think to what, you're pursuing here. And so there's like, there's the DNA of the organization itself, and that might just be inherited. It could change though, like it evolved generation by generation, or even within a generation. Maybe there's like an epigenetic modification because of behavioral change, but there's the cultural preset into the environment. And insofar as how seriously or how urgent or how critical is this even to kind of a local population. So I look at organizations in like one of my guests I had on as the president of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy foundation. And which I think there was a paper published about a year ago now where it's not so cut and dry, right? I think they did a PRS of, and I think they found more than 100 markers associated with that disease, which was thought to be, I wouldn't say defined and easily diagnosable. There were some markers, but the interesting thing, what I sense what you're building is it becomes like an iterative learning system and feedback model for not just the studies of today, but the studies of tomorrow as well. And you can imagine piggybacking studies synergistically, right? Because that's one of the toughest things to do, is get patients to come back. Like you might have patients that qualify for multiple studies. Now I'm stepping outside of my realm here because it could be conflating or conflicting issues with that. But it seems to me that there really is potential for like an iterative learning, appreciative system here, learning cycle to really ratchet this up in the future.
Yeah, totally. And 100% spot on.
So jumping back to the book writing conversation, you gave me some tips at the beginning of the call, pursuing my own writing. You're now moving into you have two books that you're working on. You're moving into the fiction space. So what's motivating that kind of future that you're starting to create?
Well, the third book is not fiction. The fourth book is. So the third book is AI and cancer. It's really, the third book is coming out in the second half of 2026, is on artificial intelligence and cancer. And it's really on how AI is affecting the cancer journey from A to Z. And I think that it's also by the same publisher, Johns Hopkins University Press. And it was inspired by my knowledge of AI right now, by working in AI every day and noticing how AI is affecting every facet of cancer care. So I wanted to bring that to bear. And I wanted really to make people understand AI and not be scared of it. So I use very simplified language, easy to read, lots of storytelling, lots of conversation and dialogue. And this way I can explain what is AI and how AI is affecting every single part of the cancer journey, such as diagnosis, treatment, and things of that nature. The fourth book is my fiction book, and also it's coming out the second half of 2026. And really, I basically, it's inspired by sometimes certain things I've encountered throughout my academic career, and I thought to myself, some of these things I could really package in a very fictional story that I can build characters from scratch. I'm basically fascinated by the idea of I can create a character that bring lots of attributes to the character, lots of certain elements, depth and breadth of the character, and then see where that takes me. I think I don't know how it's going to go. I started writing this and I had no idea where the story is going to take me. And suddenly I found myself the story taking me a completely different direction than when I first started. It was a very weird experience, if you ask me, because I was planning on going one direction, and as I was writing, I went completely different direction. But it's a fun thing to do in fiction because you're creating new characters that don't exist. And I had a lot of fun in trying to paint the character, give it so much depth and breadth. So I want you, when you read the book, to imagine that person in your head, how they look like, but also to imagine how they think alike, what is their persona, what is their character. But every fiction, Jeremy, is inspired by some element of truth. Um, so some of the fictional things, some of the stories that you are going to read in that book um, are, I would say, are going to be very believable because some of them, they could occur. Let's just leave it at that.
Okay, got you. And we mentioned at the top of the call, this is an opportunity for probably, um, I don't know if it's less frequent. You probably are invited on a lot of podcasts, but you've been running your own podcast for a period of time, and so how did that podcast start? Where is that now? Where is that going? And what's it like being on the other side of the microphone?
It's challenging to be on the other side of the microphone because I'm not used to. You're a great interviewer because you obviously give the guest the floor. I do the same, so it's very difficult. I usually speak little and let the guest speak a lot, so it's difficult for me to be doing a lot of the talking. It's been 6 years. I started originally with a podcast called Outspoken Oncology. It launched in February 2019, so almost 7 years now. And we branded that in September 2020 to Healthcare Unfiltered because I wanted to speak. I didn't want to have oncology in the title because I want to speak beyond oncology. I want to talk about other aspects. Could be diet, could be entrepreneurship, could be whatever it is. And I hope to have you on my podcast very soon. So it's been 6 years. I think the most challenging part is content. Get bored. And I think I'll try to be innovative as much as possible, try to bring the right guests. I also think there's a lot of podcasts out there, so it's very difficult to differentiate. I think you just go to any of the Spotify or Amazon or Apple and thousands of podcasts. So I'm always fascinated by the podcast market. Are there really enough people who are listening to all of this or not? So I'm going to keep going. I launched a new series called Healthcare Unfiltered Express. It's a shorter version, about 10 to 15 minutes of clinically focused podcast. So it's the same, it's Healthcare Unfiltered, but I called it Express because sometimes I just want to do something very quick on clinical stuff that just happened, new data, new research paper, new meeting. So that's the new thing where I can do the long format about a lot of topics, but I want to reserve the express to very clinically heavy, clinically focused type of topics if I can.
Yes. You know what I'll say about podcasts? I think there are less podcasts than there are books. So if you're doing good in the book space, I have every confidence you'll be doing well in the podcast space.
No, it's hard to know. It's hard to get analytics, to be honest. Like it's very analytics. It's very. And I don't know, I think people's attention span is shorter, so they sometimes may not want to consume a long format. I cannot tell. I cannot crack the code. All I can tell you, I'm having a good time, having fun, meeting a lot of people, and still going at 6 years. So I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I mentioned, you might have seen in the frame, I like to end with three questions, and I always ask them at the end. And they are, number one, if this was your last podcast, like if it was your last song you were going to sing, like what would it be? Who needs to hear it is number two. And number three is, who would you recommend as my next guest on the DNA of things? And if you will, this is my way of growing the the podcast organically. Well, you know how we met. We met through Simon, to bring it full circle. And I really enjoy this because I feel like I get like a little mini PhD on your area of subject matter expertise. And to my guests, I think the ones who are listening are ones I think who are naturally curious, but I also got a lot of potential partners who are listening. Like I can already think of a few connections that could be useful to write. But then it's also giving thought leaders such as yourself the platform, because there's a lot of wealth of information that's locked up there, and I know people are listening because they're reaching out and they're asking to be connected with guests, and so but I'm like you, I'm searching insofar as how to come into a relationship with my listeners who are maybe my single solo listener, my partner, to be connected, and more industry thought leaders such as yourselves. So just to reiterate, that's kind of where those three questions come from, is how do we now kind of distill that main point. Your last podcast, what would you say? Number two, who needs to hear it, and who would you recommend as my next guest?
So the first one is what? Say the first question again.
All right. If this was your last podcast, what would you say? What's the key message here, and who needs to hear it?
I guess if it was my last podcast, the key message is that uh, I'm still in the beginning. I'm still
Mm,
to I guess I want people to know that I'm trying my best to help patients. That's really my ultimate goal. That's really what drives me. I've always said, and I will say it again, we are all either current patients, future patient, or past patients. So I would like people to remember that, and I would like them to remember that I will continue to try to stay relevant, and that relevance means I'm trying to help patients mostly, but also the people who care for patients as well.
okay. And who would you nominate as my next guest?
Before that, who would hear it? I would like my family to hear that. I would like my kids, family, parents, everybody who is my immediate circle. I'm not sure they've ever heard any of my podcasts. Hopefully they have, but I would like them to hear it so they know exactly what drives me. Um, I think for your next guest, I would recommend a couple of patient advocates I have met along the way. I think I think patients and advocates bring so much to the table that a lot of people would gravitate to hear their perspective, whether it is
Mm,
in precision medicine, on genomics, on DNA and RNA, but also more importantly, how do they consume healthcare? What are the pluses and minuses of the healthcare system? When you talk about AI and innovation, and you try to bring innovation and AI into healthcare, how do really patients receive that? Do they really get scared? Do they get anxious? Do they embrace it or not? So I've always enjoyed meeting patients that have taught me a lot, and I'm more than happy to connect you. There are two that comes to mind. One is Erin O'Hearn. She is actually a journalist in Philadelphia, and she is a patient and an advocate. And she came on my show, and it was really well received. She is very thoughtful, and she brings a lot of ideas and just gives you the patient perspective. And then Jill Feldman, who has also been on my show. Jill Feldman is a trailblazer. She's a patient and an advocate. She has lung cancer and she is doing well, getting treatment, but she is really a very powerful voice for patients. And she explains the importance of precision medicine, genomics, and things of that nature, but also brings then the importance of language matters and words matter, because the way we sometimes speak in science may not, has to be really sensitive for the patients who are hearing this. So we should really be careful in how we use language in a way that patients embrace it as opposed to roll their eyes. So that would be my suggestions.
Amazing. Well, I will connect with you for an introduction, and yeah, it'd be my honor to extend the invitation and get the advocate to you. I've had a few on in the past, and I think we're due for that perspective. So thank you for the suggestion. And you know what? Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure would be an understatement. Really excited to have a look at the new books when they come out. So we'll definitely be in touch in the new year and circle back to get an update on how that's going. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been incredible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you.
What a fascinating individual. What I heard when I listened closely is there's a pattern that begins to emerge here, that is the truth is rarely handed to us cleanly. It must be excavated, sometimes in courtrooms, sometimes in clinics, sometimes inside systems so complex they forget the people they were built to serve. What Dr. Nabhan reminds us of is that this data alone is never enough, nor is comparison complete without rigor. And the work is really to try to hold both. Now, in accelerating clinical trials and telling patient stories and challenging corporate narratives, the same hidden thread remains. Time matters, language matters, and lives are always on the other side of every decision. This conversation left me with an invitation to look behind the curtain when something feels too tidy, to tell better stories when the truth is hard to hear, and to ask in every system we participate in who benefits if we do this better. So this thread is real, and once you decide, you find a run straight through your own work and your own questions and perhaps your own calling. Thanks for joining us in another discussion here on the DNA of Things. Looking forward to our next conversation.